Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and welcome back to Meta Monday, the weekly series where we analyze the Pokemon Pocket metagame and keep you guys up to date on everything going on in the competitive world of Pokemon Pocket. Oh man, this past weekend was a lot of fun. We had almost 400 people compete in our third weekly tournament series. It was incredible. Again, big shout out to all the judges, all of the players, and Midtom for casting with me on Sunday. Let's go over all of the results and all of the information that we got from this past weekend's competition. But before we do that, by the way, my voice is a little bit not working very well today, so you're gonna have to keep up with me. But before we get into that, I do have to let you guys know about the fourth tournament, our next tournament coming this upcoming weekend on Saturday at noon. We actually have a new sponsor for the tournament series. It is Boxed.gg. You'll hear more about them later for sure. We have some more details coming. But $250 in this week's prize pool, even more than last week. Again, everything is kind of just, it's rolling right now. Taj should be back to help cast on the weekend, but again, increased prize pool, still the same stuff. It's going to be another awesome event. Link to register will be down in the description below. Definitely go check that out. I am super excited. But anyway, let's dive right in here to the results from last weekend's tournament, the Pocket Bads tournament number 3. And here you go. Here are the final standings. We'll zoom in a little bit. One thing I will say is that, when we cover all of the deck lists, they are going to be, in the timestamps down below. All of the energy types for all of the lists also will be down there. And then, of course, at the end of the video, if you guys wanted to skip around at all, you can go ahead and use the timestamps. At the end of the video, we'll talk about all of the metagame data, all of the results, and that's where we will provide all of the best context, all of the real information that's going to be useful to you guys looking to leverage this data to compete in other tournaments or in ranked battles. So keep that in mind. Anyway, big shout out to all of the players. And this is it. This is the final standings, guys, from this weekend. Absolutely incredible. Big shout out to Robs from Brazil for getting first place, 13-1, just an absolutely insane record. Robs, man, he played so well the whole tournament, and he was playing Greninja Oricorio, so that's right. Ori Ninja is how I like to classify this deck. Got first place, and all of the other, 4 decks below him, second, third, fourth, and fifth, were all Suicune and Greninja decks. So shout out to Hamza, shout out to Mai from Japan, shout out to Light from Singapore, shout out to Eloquitas from Peru, and then again, even another Greninja Oricorio here, a Moose in 6th place from Singapore as well, and then Suji from France playing Suicune Greninja, and then all the way down here at 8th place is Frank, and he was, again, playing Flareon, and I believe Flareon Jolteon. Let me just double check this. He was playing Flareon Jolteon, so the only, I guess, non-Suicune deck in here, all the way up to top 11, which is absolutely insane, so big shout out to him. We have... what is this? Nayara Poke from Japan, also playing Ori Ninja at 9th place. We have Vincent Chandra from Indonesia playing Suicune Greninja. Congrats to you. Bixie from Singapore. A lot of Singapore representation this weekend. They all did really well. 11th place playing Suicune Greninja. And then, of course, we did have Aurora Joe from France, and he was playing Guzzlord at 12th place. A couple more Flareons here, so shout out to everybody. Iluchin from the United States went 8-3 playing Pikachu Tapu Koko, and that's kind of it. And until we get down to the top 32 standings, the variety here is a little bit lackluster, I will say. Now, there's a lot of information to talk about with today's tournament and the results. The data is actually very interesting, and I'm really excited to talk about it with you guys. So anyway, big shout out to all of the players. Again, congrats to everybody that made top 64, everybody that earned points towards our series standings, and of course, everybody in top 4 that got prizing this weekend. Super excited to see what happens next week. There is right here, look at this, Sharice Plays from Indonesia was playing Espeon Sylveon, so we did have an Espeon there at 23rd place. Actually, a lot of variety. There's another one here, Avinity at 27th place, which is pretty cool. There's a lot of variety throughout the rest of top 64. In fact, actually, if we go ahead just really quickly, and if we take a look at the day 2 metagame, there was 23 different archetypes, different deck lists that made day 2. It just so happened that all of the Suicune and Ori Ninja decks ended up at the very top of the standings. We'll talk about that and as to why that happened later in this video. But yeah, a lot of variety in terms of the decks that made top cut, which is really exciting. But anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the deck lists. So this is going to be the number 1 deck from the tournament, the first place deck, Robs, and he was playing Greninja and Oricorio. Now, if anybody watched the tournament finals, they would have seen this deck list actually beat Suicune, not only in top 4, but beat it in the grand finals as well. Sorry, I have to sneeze. Oh, I might have to edit that one out. My bad. Okay. Anyway, yeah, this is what we're classifying as sort of the new Oricorio and Greninja deck. And yes, Oricorio and Greninja has been a combo that's been around for quite some time now. Instead of playing like dual water energies and lightning energies and playing this with Giratina, we are actually just electing to play only water energies and basically just play Suicune Greninja in the deck list. So this is kind of a development that happened in the middle of last week, something that I think has drastically changed the landscape of the competitive metagame right now in Pokemon Pocket. This is the biggest story right now in the card metagame, so we have to talk about it. Again, 2 Froakie, 2 Greninja, 2 Suicune, 2 Irida, 1 Cyrus, 1 Mars, 2 Rare Candy, 2 Pokeball, 2 Research. So basically, and 1 Giant Cape as well, basically kind of the exact same deck as Suicune Greninja traditionally plays, just without Giratina, without a Leaf. We are playing 1 X speed. That does make sense. Froakie and Oricorio have a retreat cost of 1. So I think X-Speed works properly here. And anyway, we are not, what's the difference here? We're not playing Repel in the deck, which is a big deal. And then 2 Oricorios. So you might be wondering, why would we play the Oricorios instead of Giratina? There are a lot of different Suicune Greninja decks that play 1 Oricorio and 1 Giratina. So what's the difference here? Just cutting the Giratinas and playing 2 Oricorio. The entire idea of this deck, and by the way, you need to understand that this deck plays only water energies. We're not even playing dual energies, so all of the attacking options are just Suicune and Greninja. Oricorio is literally just there to act as basically a shield. In a lot of matchups that Suicune traditionally is bad against, those are decks that cannot really get around Oricorio. Oricorio has been in a very odd position. There's a reason why I have told people not to play Oricorio is because it doesn't actually counterplay Suicune Greninja at all. There are some lightning type decks that play like Zeraora and Tapu Koko and Pikachu, and those Pokemon are fairly decent into Suicune, but Oricorio itself is a bit of a liability with all of the Greninjas. Now, I do think that playing Oricorio alongside Suicune Greninja is actually probably the best way to play Oricorio currently right now in this metagame, and I find that to be definitely quite interesting. But when you play Oricorio and Suicune Greninja, as opposed to playing Giratina, you do, of course, drastically improve your matchups against a variety of other decks that aren't the mirror matchup. So that's important to keep in mind. Things like Giratina Darkrai, things like Guzzlord, maybe even things like Charizard or Decidueye or other decks that actually did have good matchups into Suicune Greninja. Oricorio fixes all of that at the price of having a much less consistent time in the mirror matchup, right? So if this deck list here was going to be going up against, let's just say, a Suicune and Greninja deck list that wasn't playing Oricorio, which is, again, the standard for Suicune and Greninja, it actually has a pretty tough time. In fact, the win rate drastically declines in the mirror matchup if you put in Oricorios for your deck, just because they don't really add anything to that specific matchup most of the time. We will talk about that more in a little bit more detail. But if you watched in Grand Finals, this player here, Rob, did actually beat a Suicune Greninja deck, not playing Oricorio, both I believe in top 4 and in finals. One of those decks might have been playing Oricorio, I forget, but keep in mind they were, of course, not playing double Oricorio. They were playing like Giratina. So he just so happened to beat that Suicune Greninja mirror matchup twice in top 4 in grand finals, even though, again, adding Oricorios to your deck list is going to make the mirror matchup against other Suicune Greninja decks that aren't playing Oricorio a lot worse. So you have to keep that in mind. The data does reflect that, and it always has reflected that. Again, I just find it very, very interesting with the inclusion of Charizard really dominating Suicune's last week, and the counter meta really developing quite honestly well around Suicune Greninja and Greninja. The Oricorio inclusions are a way to counter the counter meta, but still play Suicune Greninja at the same time. It's very interesting that this is a development. Again, people are going to look at this and say it's basically the same deck. Yes, but it functions very, very differently in terms of its approach and its ability to beat and compete with other decks at the top of the metagame. So a very, very interesting deck here. Again, I will say that Rob's played very well. Again, only water energies in this deck list. However, I just have to tell you how lucky, honestly, how fortunate he got. Again, he did play very well, but Pokemon Pocket and in any TCG, you have to get fortunate as well. So all of the credit to Rob, but if we take a look at his matches here in Top Cut, we'll see he beat not only 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 Suicune Greninja mirror matches on his way to first place. And again, this is not a good matchup for you when you're playing Oricorios in your Suicune Greninja deck, which is absolutely hilarious and crazy that he ended up beating 4 of them. And he also beat the Ori Ninja mirror match and a Flareon Eevee. So he basically beat all of the top decks of the tournament here in day 2, 5 or 6 matches in a row to win the tournament. Absolutely incredible. In day 1, he beat every deck basically other than Guzzlord. He beat Giratina Darkrai, he beat Silvally Espeon. That's an interesting deck. It went 1-6. Beat Charizard, beat Flareon, beat Ori Ninja, and beat Turbo Dark Arceus. And Turbo Dark Arceus is going to be an interesting deck to talk about. Again, we'll get into it a little bit later, but yeah, shout out to Rob. Rob's absolutely incredible performance. Technically a different deck. I mean, it is still Suicune Greninja, but theoretically, this is a different archetype than the traditional Greninja and Suicune that got first place this week. So very interesting nonetheless, but As we just talked about, the other 4 decks behind it were all Suicune and Greninja, and all of these are fairly standard. However, we'll take a look at them. So this is the second place deck here. This is Hamza, Suicune, and Greninja. I don't know where he's from, but congrats to Hamza for making it to Grand Finals. And let's take a look at his deck, and he was, in fact, playing one Oricorio. So Oricorio in Suicune ended up making it to any degree. Both decks in Grand Finals were playing one copy of Oricorio. Now, again, I just want to stress that the Oricorio does not help you in the mirror matchup at all. Like that's a literal fact. The data supports that. However, it does allow you to have a much better time into things like Charizard, into Decidueye, into Giratina, Darkrai, and of course into any deck really that doesn't traditionally do well into Oricorio. There was an interesting dynamic through basically that the metagame was developing, and I kind of stressed it a lot last week. Was that Suicune Greninja was at the top of the meta, and that there were counter meta decks forming, but those counter meta decks against Suicune and Greninja weren't Oricorio decks. They were like things like Charizard or Flareon Jolteon or, Guzzlord, things like that, right? So people were playing Oricorio and playing these lightning type decks, but they were actually strong into all of the decks that weren't Suicune. And I kept telling people that. I was like, if you want to counterplay Suicune, like don't play Oricorio in your deck lists. And then people just inevitably started to play Oricorio in Suicune and Greninja to beat and kind of deal with all of those counter meta decks, but they lost 2 other Suicune Greninjas that weren't playing Oricorio. So it was a very interesting dynamic, one of the more interesting developments that I've ever seen in any season in Pokemon Pocket. It really just goes to show how, I guess, diverse and I guess flexible that Greninja Suicune package really is. Now, this deck list here, we've seen it a bit last week. It's 1 Giratina, 1 Oricorio, and I believe they cut something from the deck. What did they cut from the deck? Leaf, I believe. So typically, a standard Suicune Greninja deck is playing 1 Giratina, 1 Cyrus, 1 Giant Cape, 1 Repel, 1 Mars, and 1 Leaf. So when you're playing double Oricorio, you have to cut the Giratina. But when you're playing, of course, Giratina and Oricorio, or 2 of any other Pokemon, you have to sacrifice one of those cards. This deck is sacrificing Leaf or any retreat option. Still 1 Mars, I think very valuable. 1 Cyrus, 1 Giant Cape, 1 Repel. These are all very, very good cards. So this was the second place deck. Again, this deck functions a lot more similarly than like traditional Suicune and Greninja. You still have the Giratina, which is a valuable option for sure in the mirror matchup. It can be absolutely devastating or very important to get this thing out on your first turn, especially when you go first. It is a game-changing card. Now, Oricorio here, again, in the mirror matchup, Oricorio doesn't really help you at all. So when you are playing Oricorio in your Suicune Greninja deck, theoretically, you are making your deck a little bit less consistent and overall just less good in the mirror matchup, playing one card that is virtually unusable in that mirror matchup. Now, there are some niche scenarios. We did see one match when we were following Rob's where his opponent's Suicune and Greninja deck actually never got a Greninja on board. Everybody that plays against Suicune and Greninja knows that that doesn't happen very often, but theoretically speaking, if they never find the Greninja, yes, Oricorio can stall time for you, but you got to understand that the other deck playing Suicune Greninja is also just drawing through their deck, and they're very likely to get Greninja out. If they get Greninja out and you have Oricorio in the board, it's just basically a free prize card. It's not helping you really to any degree. So the 1 Oricorio here, or even 2 Oricorios and no Giratina, it is going to improve your matchups into basically everything else, but is going to make your matchup into Suicune Greninja worse. So you got to keep that in mind, and I believe that is probably a big reason why Suicune and Greninja ended up actually dominating, especially in day 2, as we saw 4 of those top 5 players and beyond. A bunch of Suicune and Greninjas at the top of the standings. That's because a lot of the other decks got weeded out by these Ori Ninja decks, these Greninja Oricorio decks, which one inevitably did end up winning the tournament. But now what we're doing is kind of turning Suicune and Greninja into that Oricorio counter archetype. And again, it's not countering Suicune, it's countering all of the stuff that's not Suicune, leaving basically everything in the game to be only Suicune Greninja deck lists. And I find that to be kind of interesting. Again, I don't know if that's what the development people want, but that's the development that they're doing, right? So again, last week I tried to tell you, if you want Suicune out of the format, don't play Oricorio. Coincidentally, everybody started to play Oricorio, and they just played it with Suicune Greninja, and it ended up winning this weekend's tournament. I will say this was, I'm not, like, it's hard to call it like a fluke, but realistically, this probably shouldn't have happened from a mathematical data perspective. Rob's was absolutely on one. He just couldn't lose. He was just drawing the cards. He was playing correctly, making all the right plays, and he just got put into a good position, and he capitalized on it. So you got to give Robs all of the credit in the world. But yeah, Suicune Greninja absolutely ate up the tournament because all of the other decks like Giratina, Darkrai, like Flareon, like Charizard, like all of these other decks, they kind of got eaten up completely by the Oricorio decks that we're also seeing a lot of play. So very interesting. If we take a look at Mai's third place Suicune and Greninja deck, we'll see that this deck was playing no Oricorio. Now, to be 100% honest with you, 100% honest. This is still the version of Suicune Greninja that I would personally recommend. What's interesting here is that he's still not playing a retreat card. So Leaf or X-Speed, or I guess X-Speed was in the top deck, but no Leaf or Inflatable Boat in the two highest placing Suicune Greninja deck lists. They were actually playing, this player here, Mai, was playing one Mars and one red card, so double disruption and no retreat options. That does also leave you open to Repel, and this deck list is not playing Repel. So again, very interesting here, and he was playing double Giant Cape, so no Repel or any or protection from Repel. So he completely bypassed that whole aspect of the deck. I actually do like Giant Cape, but again, Repel feels so good in the mirror matchup. And honestly, Leaf is kind of counter to Repel, so it's important to have in the deck in my mind. But anyway, this is the highest placing, or the second highest placing Suicune and Greninja deck, but the highest one that wasn't playing any Oricorios. A very interesting list. Big shout out to Mai. Honestly, now I want to take a look at the fourth place Suicune Greninja deck lights. These are all of the players that obtained prizing here in top 4. And his deck list is what I would consider to be kind of like the standard list for Suicune and Greninja. Like I said, 1 Leaf, 1 Repel, 1 Giant Cape, 1 Mars, right? So this to me is like the core package for Suicune and Greninja. We've seen a bunch of people edit out the cards, add Oricorios, cut the Leafs, add red cards, things like that, right? But this to me is like kind of the core aspect of Suicune and Greninja, and it's still kind of the base that I would recommend. If I'm playing on ranked ladder right now, I'm still choosing to play this version of Suicune and Greninja. And the reason for that is because, again, when you add Oricorios to your deck, you make your mirror matchup a lot worse, exponentially worse, in fact. And honestly, I don't think that Suicune and Greninja is that bad into really any of the other decks that it really warrants having to play Oricorio in my mind. So I still think that Suicune and Greninja is the best deck, whether you're playing Oricorio or not. I personally don't really understand the whole Oricorio thing, which is funny because it did end up winning this week. But in basically, I would say like 95% of the outcomes in a different timeline, in a different multiverse, it just would have lost at some point to a normal Suicune Greninja deck. It was just he was destined to win this weekend, and he made it happen. But anyway, that's the development. That is kind of what's going on at the top of the metagame. The Oricorio decks kind of just got thrown in with Suicune Greninja. They combined the archetypes, and now there's really no reason to play any Lightning decks. There's just not. You're either countering Suicune Greninja, or you're playing something maybe that counters Oricorio, but Oricorio counters that, and then probably Suicune Greninja is just going to end up still the top deck. So a weird development. It really is. I just didn't expect this to happen, but this Oricorio and Greninja deck did really well at the Froggy X tournament a few days before our tournament this weekend, and I think that caused a lot of people to play this deck, and of course, it just ended up winning. That's just how it happened. So very interesting indeed. A bunch of different Suicune Greninja decks that I'm just really not necessarily going to cover. I guess we can take a look here at Nayara Pokes deck at 9th place here. Frank Freak. My bad. Argentina. I might have got that wrong earlier, but Frank Freak from Argentina, 9-3. He was playing Flareon Eevee at 8th place, so he did make top 8. This is the only deck not playing Suicune in top 8. Let's take a look at his deck. And now I still really love Flareon and Jolteon. The weird thing about, again, the results of this tournament is that this is one of the few Flareon Jolteon decks only playing 1 copy of Jolteon. And when you're playing 1 copy of Jolteon against an Oricorio deck, it's a little bit sketchy, right? Because that's their only option to get around those Oricorios, and we are very reliant on that Jolteon. So most Flareon decks, I think, at this point are playing double Jolteon. In fact, I would recommend double Jolteon right now, especially on the ranked ladder. You're probably going to see a lot of Suicune, Greninja, and Oricorio. But either way, 1 Jolteon in this list. I still think Flareon Jolteon's a really good deck. I think that Flareon is unique in the sense that it's actually really good into Giratina Darkrai, and it's good to a number of other decks of the format, and Jolteon just does give it a little bit of like that boost to kind of get around Oricorio and Suicune and Greninja all wrapped into one. So I actually really like this deck. I really do. I do think that in general, Flareon struggled a little bit more because of the Oricorios. And I know that we play Jolteon to get around Oricorio, but it's not like always, we don't always get the Jolteon, right? So that matchup, although we do have an answer to Oricorio, isn't like a guaranteed win, right? And, the Suicune Greninja stuff itself can also kind of overpower Flareon if it doesn't get off to a hot start. So not the best week for Flareon Jolteon, but it really was like the other deck other than the Suicune Greninja stuff that ended up kind of doing somewhat well in the tournament. So big shout out to Frank Freak. I do love the deck. I still believe in Flareon Jolteon, but it's just crazy how Oricorio found its way into Suicune Greninja decks, and now that's sort of, the counter meta, which is interesting. So Suicune Greninja kind of dominating really like 2 out of the 3 sides of the metagame. Now, Oricorio, in my mind, this is really the first real placement for Oricorio. This is the first time that it's actually won something significant, and I find that to be very interesting. In fact, mainly just because the only time Oricorio has really won anything large or over the last couple of months has been when it's paired with Greninja and Suicune. So there you go. That seems to be just the way that we have to play Oricorio if you want to play Oricorio. But there are a lot of good decks that aren't Suicune Greninja or Oricorio. So hopefully the meta balances out a little bit more this week. But again, just a really interesting development. If we go down here to 12th place, Aurora Joe playing Guzzlord went 8-2 from France. And he did actually pretty well in the tournament. And I think that Guzzlord, again, very interestingly positioned deck list here. I think that, again, it's just, it falls under the archetypes of decks that struggled a little bit more this weekend because so many decks were playing double Oricorio. They were playing Irida, and they're playing Greninja. It just kind of all sums up to be a deck that really does rely on Celesteela flipping heads sometimes. And with one copy of Will in the deck, that's not a super reliant strategy. We did see that happen once on stream. But yeah, Guzzlord, traditionally a deck that's good into Suicune and Greninja. More Oricorios coming around. Guzzlord doesn't really love the Oricorio stuff. So it just becomes a little bit more of an awkward deck in this current metagame, or at least the metagame from this past weekend. But, Guzzlord's still floating around. I still think it's one of the best decks. It is also a bit of a high roll deck with the coins that we're flipping. It's kind of similar to Flareon Jolteon, where like it has really high upside, just depending on whether we get lucky on our coin flips or not. And then again, Frost here from India also playing Flareon Eevee, and then Ghost 319 also playing Flareon and Eevee, which is probably Jolteon decks. This one was playing Jolteon, so Frost was playing Jolteon, and this player also playing Jolteon. But again, all of these decks here, we're playing one Jolteon, so I do kind of feel like double Jolteon might be the wave now with so much more Oricorio being into the format, being interjected into the metagame. But anyway, we have Illuchine from the United States, 8-3. This was our highest really placing like actual lightning type deck. At what place was this? So this was 15th place, and this is going to be sort of Pikachu Tapu Koko deck. So like there's a bunch of different variants. Like the lightning type stuff is interesting because it's been sort of mixed so much for quite some time now. It's hard to really kind of nail down like a defined archetype. But again, double Oricorio, 2-0 Aura, and we have Tapu Koko and we have Pikachu. This is a deck that's very well positioned into things like Guzzlord, into Giratina, Darkrai, into Charizard, but into Suicune and Greninja, I just don't think we have enough going on, right? Oricorio is not going to help you into Greninja. Zero Aura can be helpful if you go first, but most of the time it's really not that useful either because they play double Irida, they play Giant Capes, and then of course Pikachu can one-hit KO anything, and then Tapu Koko is a really good lead-off Pokemon into Suicune and Greninja, but it's not really good into like a lot of other things like Guzzlord, or of course like Flareon, or there's a lot of things. Like Tapu Koko is specifically good into Suicune, but it's not that good into anything else. Also going first, it's not that good. So going second, Tapu Koko lead is very good, but again, this is a deck that really isn't going to be phenomenally well positioned into Suicune. It really is a deck that beats all of the other stuff, and I think that's a big reason why these lightning decks didn't necessarily do that well, especially in day 2, is just because of all of the Suicune, Greninja, Oricorio that was running around. Kind of the best way to play Oricorio right now. But yeah, I do like the deck list. Shout out to Illuchine. He's a great player. He always does well at all of the tournaments, so no surprise there. But yeah, Pikachu, Tapu Koko. It's just unfortunate, like how many other Oricorio decks we saw play that were just Suicune and Greninja. Again, that's the development. That's how this metagame currently is turning into. It's just a really interesting thing to have happen this late into this metagame, but it's happening, and we have to adjust to it. We have to change what we're doing to it, and we'll talk about it maybe a little bit later this week. How do we kind of counteract that, or how do we develop further based off of this change in the metagame? Tense Regent from the United States. This is our highest placing Giratina Darkrai deck. That's right, Giratina Darkrai, for maybe the first time in forever, had the highest placement here, 22nd place. So 0 Giratina Darkrai in top 16. Again, a lot of those Ori Ninja decks running around. Effectively, Ori Ninja is kind of an auto-win matchup into Giratina Darkrai. That's the main strength. So one thing that we are doing with the Oricorio Greninja decks is basically pushing Giratina Darkrai out of the format. So maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's good. I mean, I don't know. Is that what we want? Who knows? But anyway, Giratina Darkrai, a pretty standard list here. I think at this point right now, Giratina Darkrai is not very well positioned. I would not recommend it. Yeah, I mean, it's still a deck list. It's just going to be struggling now, right? With those double Oricorios, double Greninja, double Irida decks. I mean, that's just not something that is going to be easy to get around when you're playing Giratina Darkrai. I'll tell you that much. But anyway, Shariz plays from India, 23rd place. He was playing Espeon, Sylveon, and then we had another one down here, Affinity. So I think that Espeon and Sylveon is actually a totally fine deck. In fact, I actually don't mind this deck into the Ori Ninja decks, but traditionally struggles into Suicune Greninja, struggles into Giratina Darkrai, struggles into Guzzlord. So when you take a look at a lot of the other most played decks right now in the format, also traditionally struggles into Flareon as well. So it's just not a deck that I've ever really considered to be well positioned throughout the last month or two, but is a deck list that in in theory, in a vacuum, is very consistent and very good. So like, you know, not considering its matchup spreads or its, you know, positioning against the other decks of the format, it is still a very, very quality deck. Psychic in general is just in a little bit of a tough spot because there's so many dark type Pokemon running around. We do have the one Sylveon to get around Oricorio, but in general, I would say that this deck list probably is not something either I would recommend, but both players ended up actually doing quite well with it, placing in top 64, top 32. So congrats to them, honestly. I do love to see it. Nuzzle T from Italy was actually playing Silvally Zero Aura. So, you know, Silvally Zero Aura is an interesting deck list. I actually kind of feel like if I'm playing Silvally Zero Aura right now, I might want to include Oricorio just to potentially help us in the other Oricorio matchups, right? When we're playing Zero Aura and Silvally, like Zero Aura is fine into Oricorio, but really we're reliant on Silvally. And this is a deck list that, again, is going to struggle against a lot of stuff unless it goes second. So in order to kind of counterbalance going second or not going second on some games, I think that Oricorio is actually probably a pretty valuable Pokemon here. But anyway, we are playing one elemental switch, which is interesting. You know, the more Oricorios you add, the less supporter cards you add, the less consistent that Silvally becomes. I think Silvally is actually a pretty good Pokemon. It's definitely really good into a lot of those other Oricorio decks, but in general, still not consistent enough to get around things like Guzzlord, like Suicune and Greninja. So Silvally is a good Pokemon, but again, it's just been a little bit underwhelming for the last couple of weeks. But shout out to Nuzzle T there. Did find his placement here into the tournament. And then we also have My Diamonds here at 30th place. And he was playing the old Suicune Palkia Gyarados deck. This actually is one of the most fun decks to watch. And we covered a couple of his games on Sunday on our Top Cut stream. He did really well. This Gyarados is really, really fun. I kind of forget what he lost to. I believe he ended up going down to Suicune, Greninja, and Oricorio. I can't really remember. No, a deck that performed very valiantly. I actually love this deck. It feels more ethical as far as Suicune decks go, right? You're not playing Greninja and you're not playing Cyrus, and for that reason, I actually am always rooting for this deck when I see it. It's very fun to play. It is a quality deck. In a world where we didn't have Greninja, this might be the top water / Suicune deck, and I find that to be very, very cool. And, you know, again, in another timeline, in another universe, maybe this is the water type deck that ends up kind of seeing the most play. But for now, it is a bit still of like an off meta, like a niche pick, but still one of my favorite decks. So big shout out to My Diamonds. Had a great run here this weekend. If we go down here at 38th place, Umbra Harion from Bosnia and what is this? Herzen Jovina? I have no idea. I'm so bad at this. I apologize for butchering this name. I don't know the name of this. I can't pronounce this very well, but again, massive shout out to Harion because he went 7-2. He made Top Cut playing Porygon-Z. That's right. I love this deck and I want to showcase it to you guys. This is just straight Porygon-Z with Tapu Lele, Psychic Energies, and nothing else. The whole idea with this deck list is slowing beam. The 70 damage does to a KO Suicune. It can get around Oricorio very, very easily, and Tapu Lele can take KOs on the bench. It's actually a really cool deck. The new Buggy Evolution Porygon 2 card allows us to actually go into Porygon-Z very, very consistently. So going second, we can actually have Porygon-Z out, hitting for 70 damage, and slowing beam here during your opponent's next turn. Attacks used by the defending Pokemon cost 1 more energy. So a very, very interesting deck. In fact, I believe this player actually got knocked out by the Gyarados, which was a very uniquely bad matchup for Porygon. So it's kind of unfortunate that they ended up facing each other in that Top Cut match. But this was one of my favorite deck lists. Just a single prize, you know, aggressive archetype, very consistent with this new Buggy Evolution Porygon 2. 2 Lily to stay alive, Poison Barb to deal extra damage. I actually really, really love this deck list. The Pokecom stuff is really cool. So Pokeball, Pokecom, these are cards that actually shuffle your deck. So after you data scan with Porygon and you check the top card of your deck here, you can actually choose to shuffle your deck if it's not a card that you want. And that's actually really cool. That's a dynamic that we don't often see in Pokemon Pocket. A very creative deck. I think this Porygon-Z is actually a little bit underrated. And as far as sort of off meta decks go, as far as like niche meta decks go, I actually love this. And I think that in this newly heavy Oricorio format, Porygon-Z actually has a ton of potential. And again, like once you attack that Suicune and it needs to have 3 energies to attack, that means that it's that much more difficult for them to set up a second attacking Pokemon. And if we can kind of out-survive them and KO that first Suicune, then we're actually in a pretty good position. Tapu Lele can snipe Pokemon on the bench. Shout out to Tapu Lele. It was very relevant at one point in the current metagame or in a previous metagame. So very, very cool. Shout out to Porygon-Z. Shout out to Flareon, an absolutely incredible deck. He had a great run in the tournament. I want to also talk about ABman or Abman21 from Mexico. He was playing Dark Arceus. So Dark Arceus was actually one of the most successful decks here in day one of the tournament. And a big reason for that is because this is a uniquely positioned deck list that is, of course, Darkrai and Tyrogue, which allows you to just get around Oricorios very easily, but we're still playing just Turbo Arceus with 3 baby Pokemon, Mantyke, Magby, and Pichu. The energy type doesn't matter. We're playing Dark Energies in the deck list. This deck allows us to potentially hit for that 150 damage to KO a Suicune, to KO a Giratina, or KO whatever on turn 2. So it's literally just Turbo Arceus with the Darkrai Tyrogue package to get around Oricorio very easily. I actually really like this Tyrogue. With Giovanni, can't actually KO other opposing baby Pokemon. This deck list, I think, is actually uniquely well positioned. Only 3 people played it, or only a couple people played it this tournament, but they all ended up doing really well. And I think that's because it's a very uniquely positioned deck list. Very similar to the Snorlax Daycare deck. It's effectively the same deck just without Snorlax. But again, Snorlax does make the deck virtually worse in every scenario other than Giratina Darkrai. So I don't think it's necessarily worth running right now. Not many people are playing Giratina Darkrai, and if they are, I just don't think they're going to do very well. So I think that this deck list is actually a very, very smart decision. Theoretically, if we do an updated tier list tomorrow, I'm actually going to rank this fairly high because I think that it's uniquely well positioned. One of the decks that actually ended up doing very well in day one of competition. Very, very, very cool. We did have right here the highest placing Decidueye deck at 6-3, Satoshi from nowhere, I guess, from outer space. He was just playing Decidueye, and we all know what Decidueye is all about. Again, we are playing 2 of the Sniping Arrow Decidueye, so theoretically Decidueye has that advantage over Charizard in terms of its matchups into Oricorio, but the deck list is just, it loses to itself, right? I think this is a totally fine deck list. It's good into a variety of different things. It's going to be good into Guzzlord. It can be decent into Suicune Greninja, but unfortunately, it's just not consistent enough to always contend with Suicune Greninja. It's just not drawing the cards that Suicune is, and then theoretically speaking, there's the possibility that we just don't get Decidueye out, and then our deck is just too slow. And unfortunately, with a lot of other fast-paced decks in the format, Decidueye can just struggle a little bit. J-Hove, the absolute legend here, 53rd place, representing Dragonite again, 6-3, did find his way here in Top Cut and made it into top 64 as well. There were 75 people that made Top Cut, by the way. It was we had so many players that it was even more than 64, but this is traditional single energy type Sylveon Dragonite. So, the deck he ran to get 3rd place, I think, or 2nd place, I forget, at the what was it, at our first tournament? Or yeah, I think it was the first. Was it the second tournament? I think it was the first tournament. Anyway, J-Hove is an absolute legend. Keeps repping Dragonite, keeps doing well as well. I think he just knows how to play the deck to some degree. Dragonite is really fun, and I do believe that the single energy type Dragonite is actually the best way to play it. Big shout out to J-Hove. And then down here, yes, we've got some other stuff. We've got Daycare down here. A couple more Turbo Dark Arceuses, which either didn't show up or lost in the first round of day 2, unfortunately, but yeah, it's Charizard had an interesting run this weekend. Again, this was sort of the counter meta of last week, and then again the counter meta got countered. So this is not a bit like it's interesting because this was like the biggest story of last weekend, but the reason why Charizard didn't do very well this weekend is because, again, for whatever the reason, people chose to counterplay Charizard and not counterplay Suicune Greninja. So it's hilarious, right? Think about how many people played the Ori Ninja deck this weekend, specifically kind of hard countered Charizard. It feels bad, but you know what? Charizard has its time in the light. Everybody, I think, in the competitive scene wants Suicune to still stay alive, so they even just played double Oricorio Suicune Greninja. They said, I'm not losing to Charizard. Charizard's not entering into the top of the metagame. We're just going to keep playing Suicune and Greninja. We're just going to play it with Oricorio. So interesting for sure. Again, it really just comes down to what people want to counterplay. At this point, people don't want to counterplay Suicune. It is the top dog. People are either going to play it or they're going to counter the counter to it. And that's where we're at in the metagame, quite frankly. So Charizard definitely had potential amongst other decks like Flareon, Jolteon to really kind of take over Suicune and Greninja. But the players had other plans. They said, nah, we're going to keep Suicune in here. We're just going to play Oricorio with it, counter the counter meta while still playing Suicune. And unfortunately, that's kind of what happened this weekend, leaving basically nothing at the top of the standings other than Ori Ninja and Suicune and Greninja. That is the metagame right now. That is what people are playing. I think that next weekend things will probably even back out a little bit after the the aggressive rise of Greninja and Oricorio. I think things will balance out a little bit. Other decks will rise up. Maybe Dark Arceus does well. Who knows? But in general, guys, that's kind of what we're looking at. That's the results from this weekend. Those are all of the top placing decks. Very interesting development. Again, Suicune and Greninja theoretically did not win the tournament. It was Greninja or Oricorio. even though Suicune and Greninja definitely should have won the tournament. But the results of everything were massively affected by all of the Greninja Oricorio that saw play. That is the story of this weekend. This is the new deck on the block. Don't get confused. This deck still loses to the mirror matchup. We'll prove it here in the second portion of our Meta Monday today. If you're still here watching this video, comment down below, say, I'm the man. I made it this far into the video. We're going to go ahead and take a look at the metagame tab, and this is where all of that data, we're going to showcase all of that data to you guys. So anyway, here's the metagame tab. Suicune and Greninja here, by far still the most played deck. It went down a little bit, 22.34% meta share, had a losing win rate, had a 49% win rate, and that includes day 2. If we take a look at day 1, it had a 46% win rate. So Suicune and Greninja was heavily counterplayed throughout all of day 1. Charizard, the second most played deck. Flareon and Jolteon, the third most played deck. So a lot of the tournament, almost 20%, more than 20% of the tournament was counterplaying Suicune, and we see that reflected in its results in day 1, 217 to 249. That is a drastically low win rate. That is by far the lowest win rate we have ever seen for Suicune and Greninja. So the counter meta did work. It did work. It was implemented and it was in place. I find that to be very interesting. But if we go down here, this is what we see. We see Greninja Oricorio. 20 people played it, and they went 64 and 43. That's a 56.64% win rate. So absolutely farmed all of the counter meta decks here, really kind of rose up as that other prominent option. A bunch of them ended up making it into day 2. A lot of other decks struggled, but as we see here, Pikachu and Tapu Koko, both degrees actually did pretty well, and actually Suicune Palkia did pretty well as well, which I love to see. And then look at this, Darkrai Arceus, 19 and 9. Only 4 people played it. They all did really well. Almost all of them there made it into day 2. So that was a deck that, again, just randomly ended up being very well positioned. Silvally Zeraora actually also did well. I think that those 4 players playing Silvally Zeraora probably did well because of the Oricorio and Greninjas being added to the format. So you got to keep that in mind. This new Oricorio Greninja deck, even though it was only 20 players, I think drastically shifted the results of all of the meta share data and the win rates for all of these decks. So it's kind of crazy to see, right? Suicune and Greninja, this is day 1, low win rate. Charizard EX, low win rate. Flareon Jolteon, a low win rate. It's because all of the decks kind of fell to the counter meta. And if we go into day 2, we'll see here that this is reflected with Suicune Greninja dominating, Greninja Oricorio dominating, and actually Flareon Jolteon did dominate, went 16 and 7. Even Giratina Darkrai did well, but Charizard really struggled. So much Oricorio seeing play, just so much Oricorio seeing play. It's absolutely insane. That's sort of the combined stats here. So it's really interesting to see how this all worked out. Again, Greninja Oricorio ended up winning the tournament, but really all of the most played decks had really losing win rates because we are in a sort of counter meta / counter meta phase right now of this metagame, and I find that to be very interesting. So unfortunately, Charizard definitely struggled. Everything really kind of struggled, but again, I think a big reason for that was that new inclusion of Greninja and Oricorio right here. 20 people played. A lot more people will be playing it in the subsequent weeks, I tell you that much. Getting first place this week and doing having such a high win rate, just a very uniquely well-positioned deck. Again, I think it was sort of imbalanced, right? So when you have imbalances in sort of those 3 aspects of the metagame, whether it's the meta driver deck, the top of the meta like Suicune and Greninja, and then you have the counter meta, and then you have the counter to the counter meta, which in this sense is Oricorio, it was kind of imbalanced, right? So the fewer players playing Greninja Oricorio ended up doing a lot better than the variety of players that were playing the counter Suicune decks and the Suicune decks in general, right? So that's why what we see these top 4 decks not doing very well, but Greninja Oricorio doing well, and then some of the other Lightning decks as well doing well this week. So that's very cool. And then again, look at this Darkrai Arceus, 62.5% win rate. Absolutely hilarious. So if we go ahead and we take a look at day 2, we will see the variety of different decks that made it into the top cut. But really the big story here is still going to be dominated by the 3 major decks, I would say right now, that are defining the metagame. Now this might change, but to me, it is Suicune Greninja, it is Greninja Oricorio, and it is Flareon Jolteon. These are the decks. These are all of the decks right now. Again, Suicune Greninja, the best deck in the game. Greninja Oricorio, the counter to the counter meta, but the counter meta is Flareon Jolteon, predominantly a deck list that really doesn't care about either of these 2 matchups and can definitely win depending on the scenario. So to me, that's really what we have right now. We have sort of a nice 3-faced metagame, although before what we had previously was that that wasn't really the case. So what I do expect, if we had even more time this season, we really only have 2 more weeks, but if we had even more time, what we would see eventually is probably a pretty even balance between Suicune Greninja, Greninja Oricorio, and Flareon and Eevee. Those would probably be the 3 decks that end up evening out, with maybe some other inclusions along the way. But yeah, guys, that's the results of this weekend's tournament. Let Let me know what you guys think. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. Very interesting Meta Monday. Again, big congratulations to all of the players. Thank you guys all for playing. Thank you to the big team of judges and moderators that make the tournament happen. None of it would happen if it weren't for you guys. So massive shout out to all you guys over in the Discord. Big shout out to Mintom for casting with me this Sunday. However, this coming weekend, Taj will be back. So you'll get Taj and Mintom on Saturday, and I'll make an appearance with Taj on Sunday stream. But definitely go register for the fourth tournament here, sponsored by Boxed GG. More info on the sponsor here coming up. They did sponsor the prize pool, $250. Even higher than last week. That's right, 125 to first place. Second place gets $75, and then third and fourth place will get $25. Go check out Boxed GG. We're going to be working with them, hopefully more in the future, and they were kind enough to sponsor this upcoming tournament and probably some future tournaments as well. Very, very exciting news. Link to register will be down in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you guys next time, and yeah. Bye.